Leah asked everybody if they could introduce themselves and share what brings us here today. And I'm Heather, also known as Vayana, and I'm from Hawaii, and I'm so excited about the upcoming sanctuary class that I signed up for with Leah that I wanted to kind of get inspired early. And so I went ahead and signed up for this. The storytelling that Leah does changed my life and changes lives, and is so powerful that I'm really excited to learn the skill.
I'm Gigi, and I'm in White Salmon, Washington on the Columbia River Gorge. And I just completed her Healing Your Love Story class, and it was transformational, so that's why I'm here.
I'm Kariana. I live in the state of Connecticut, the land of the Hamanasset Wagang people, and I love storytelling. I'm a storyteller, and I've taken numerous workshops and master classes with Leah Lamb, and absolutely love them. They are transformational, and I want more. And it feels right in the place that I'm in for it to be here today. Felt called.
I'm Linda Witt. Oh, sorry. And I'm a retired child and adolescent therapist, but I've always been a storyteller, and I have beautiful grandchildren that I want to tell stories to.
Hello, my name is Vicky. I'm from Niagara Falls, Canada. I'm here just to see if this is going to be a fit and learn. Storytelling is part of what I do. I'm a forest therapy guide. So I just want to see if it's kind of a fit and see how it goes. Nice to meet all you ladies. I keep my camera off because my bandwidth gets choppy.
Hello, I just want to say, oops, can you hear me now? Yay! I've commandeered my housemate's office, who internet is closest to him. I just want to say thank you all to who has spoken. I should have more internet connectivity issues at the beginning of all my classes. What a pleasure just to get to hear from people who have gone through the experience. And I do want to make space for a couple more people if you feel called just to speak to what brings you here specifically. And yes, thank you for reminding me. I do have 2 locations beaming in because this technology time is really having a party with me, including I can only have sound from one device, but not the other. So that's why sometimes you'll hear my name, but not always see my face pop up, but we'll manage that. Okay, anyone else just want to speak to what specifically calls you here? And today I was really gonna, again, focus the theme on, working with story as a tool to live through the times that we're in. And so if you've got a specific thing that is alive for you, I will speak to it throughout the day. And there will be opportunities, not the day, throughout the hour. And then there will be other opportunities for you to also speak throughout the class. So let's say like 1 or 2 more intros and then we will begin.
I just wanted to speak for a second. I'm interested in poetry and I do write some, so that's my interest, and I'm keeping my microphone off because my canary's singing in the background.
I'm Mari, and I am a sound healer, and I have workshops for clients, and I am interested in restoring your world.
I'm Heather, and I come to you from Nebraska. I work with children and families and educators in nature-rich environments, and I'm finding more and more times when I'd like to be able to tell a story more succinctly or with more detail. So that's what I'm mostly interested in. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely, wonderful. So we'll talk a little bit, we're gonna speak, I'll try to get a little bit of information on the detail of that kind of information as we speak today. Okay, here we go. So let us begin by closing our eyes.
Okay. May I introduce myself, please?
What was that?
May I introduce myself? I was a little late because I couldn't figure out how to get into Zoom.
Please.
Yeah, my name is Liliana. I live in Tucson, Arizona. I am original from Bolivia, South America. And the reason this been called to me because I've been going to storytelling circle for women of color here in Tucson. And I guess through her, I got the information about this one. So I want to thank you for doing this. I think storytelling is very important, not only for our own healing, but I think healing from many, many generations before us, and for the healing that comes forward, you know, for the generations that are going to walk after we're going. So, and that's what calls me to this. It's more the healing part of it, not just for myself, but how can I bring that to myself, but also share that with the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Leah, sorry,
Yeah.
I was also very late and I apologize. I could be very quick. My name is Mar. Hola Liliana, mucho gusto de saber. Hay gente de Bolivia por aquí. I am actually in Canada on Vancouver Island, and I'm presently working for a few years with First Nations. So I come from a different part of the world. So I've been trying to build bridges of understanding and respect among different peoples. And I find that it's through storytelling that we can achieve that. So I'm here to learn and soak from all of you. So Haishka.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to speak, Liliana, you know, what you're speaking about. Michael Mead, if anyone is not familiar with Michael Mead, you know, where it's a thing to get to be alive at the same time as him. He's carrying over being a wisdom keeper for how to hold the old stories. And he's doing a lot of teaching online right now, and he's being very generous with it. And one of the things that he said that really spoke out to me was that, you know, how do we get through these kinds of times? And let us say, as storytellers, we get to define the times that we're in, right? We're the ones that are busy making meaning, or can be if we get stuck in that. It's a curse and a blessing as storytellers when we go deep into rushing into making meaning. But what he was saying was that to get through, if I was to say that this is a time of initiation, if I was to put that lens of examination through what's happening right now, and then all of a sudden, it's when we look at initiation, telling our stories and having our collective get to hear the stories of our time is part of what brings the healing. And so Liliana, it's just beautiful to hear that that's happening. I'd love to learn more about that, and it's something I would definitely love to call forward in this space. Okay, so now let's begin. I mean, we've already begun, right? The story, we're mid-story, like any good story, we began with the action. So let's, which is with you. So let's close our eyes. And as you close your eyes, just take a moment before you do anything, before you put any effort into this day, in this way, in this moment, just having a moment to feel yourself in this space. Become so aware of your body, it's as if you can see the outline of it from the outside. And as you examine this natural position of your being, just noticing, where are you today in your alignment? Are you leaning forward? Are you collapsing in on yourself? Have you assumed this extraordinarily rigid, straight posture? Do you feel absolutely at ease and in alignment with the position that you've come to us in today? And as we go about this, it's never about telling a story about it. It's not about making judgment about it. It's we're walking towards the threshold of being together and being in story and experiencing ourselves as the vessel of story. So you want to look at, how is our vessel doing today? Knowing that it is an extraordinary container that our spirit has chosen to live within. And so perhaps now you want to feed this vessel with some nice deep air. It's an extraordinary thing. This thing that is for absolutely for free. And without forcing it, not this big effort breath, but just this nice, slow sipping and luxury of what is here for you. as if every single cell of your being is being nourished by the delight of this moment that you've given yourself. And as your exhale is coming, just exhaling slowly, not pushing, not forcing, but just really allowing all of it to come out, emptying yourself out to receive today. And continuing with your own nice rhythm of nice slow breaths. And finding your way into a position that feels in alignment to your body, that feels good to you today. For me, that often involves lifting up the core, eliminating that crunch in the core organs. And as that happens, inevitably something else wants to move. It's this ripple effect, right? So sometimes my knees want to come in, my feet want to find themselves fully positioned, straight on the earth, on the floor. Sometimes the shoulders then say, oh gosh, I'm ready to open. And sometimes the palms want to come forward. Sometimes you might want to imagine that there's a beautiful thread at the very top of your head. It just gives you a little extra lift, uncrunching your neck. And from this place, we're creating space, right? So all those old stories, all the stories that make us, create us, they helped form that position that we each found ourselves in. And now here we are coming in to create space in this container. Spaciousness for another kind of living. Making space for new stories. Maybe even exhaling out some on the way out the door. And from here, just seeding your intention for today. We got to hear from some people who really spoke with such clarity about where their curiosity is, what they're committed to in the realm of story. And perhaps you are aligned with them and they spoke for you, or perhaps they inspired something in you, or perhaps there's something completely different that's alive in you. And I invite you to get crystal clear with your intention. Kind of create some magic and listen as if your intention is strong enough to call forth the answer. Woven mysteriously into our time together. I'm going to read you a quote. For those of you who've been with me, you guys have heard this quote like 300 times. But I love this quote, and it keeps working. And it keeps unfolding for me. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. Let's just look at that, just because that is so rich, especially in our times. My gosh, I'm just going to read this line once more. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. I would even insert maybe to be invisible. Often, too often, stories saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward and they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. I would take out the we, perhaps. Sometimes we do it without questioning. I think those of us who've been around here can't even agree with that blanket statement anymore. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit, a really skilled and committed journalist who is serving as a mirror. She will not let anything go that she sees without reflecting it back. I'll put that quote in the chat box, so if you want it, you can have it. Okay, so a little intro to our day. This webinar, I see some people that are regulars here. Some of you guys have experienced this webinar before. Some of you have been coming to the Creator Matrix one. This one is really designed to give you a very basic introduction to storytelling as a doorway to the divine, as a sacred art form, And really we'll talk a little bit about, and a lot of it's like, think about, we're going to look at the map, the landscape of sacred storytelling, ourselves as sacred storytellers. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the things that people often don't take into consideration when talking story and building community through story. And all along the way, I'm going to ask questions, and those questions are legitimate. They're real. Like they're not just me like talking to myself. And so I really invite you to, when those questions emerge, to see if there's something in you that wants to speak. And so this is your first invitation for that kind of deep listening and answering the call. And sometimes like the heat will come up, we'll feel it in our heart, our pulse will start getting harder, it's like we're stronger. We can feel that something wants to come through, but we don't always know what it is. And the really fantastic thing with these particular questions that I'll be seeding throughout the day is that there's no wrong answer. So I invite you, when that moment comes, to play in the game of eloquence. And eloquence is not the game of strategic cleverdom. I've never said that word cleverdom before, but it's not about being clever or strategic with your language. It's something else. It's this piece of putting your feet on the earth, taking a nice deep breath, connecting to that muse, to the inspiration, to the ancestors, to whatever it is that is yours, that inspires and speaks through you, and then see what wants to come through. And I ask that you do it with a form of generosity, in the sense that you be essential with your language. So it's not about going on and on and on. It's about being clear to the moment of what is the essence of what wants to come through you. And then speaking to that. Okay, so that is what we're going to play with today. We might even get to talk a little bit about your creator matrix and go from there. You can always throw up a hand and I will see your hand if it's raised, if you have a question, or you can always put questions in the chat box and then pick those up. And you might also be inspired and have something that you want to add. And please, by all means, please feel free to put that in that chat box so that we can all receive the wisdom that's in our whole room. Okay, so a little bit about me. I grew up in a farm in Vermont. It was definitely where I started my listening skills. I was an only child, and I got to wander the back 40 and play in the trees and the creeks, the grass, and it really gave me this relationship of connection. And it took me out of the story that connection only happens through people, and it gave me this great gift of really understanding at a very young age the connection that comes when experiencing direct relation with the natural world. And I ended up moving around a lot as a child, and I will confess that stories are part of what made childhood, it helped me get through childhood. I moved every single year until I was in high school. So I was always a new kid in town. And wow, kids aren't always nice at that age. And storytellers saved my life. I said storytellers, it's interesting, it's true. The storytellers, the people that wrote those books that I was reading, really did save my life. They gave me a way into myself. They gave me a way to escape the pains of the world. And they gave me a way to understand a much larger world than I was experiencing. And stories began to save my life again when I went through one of the first experiences of deep loss and grief when I was in high school and my best friend committed suicide. And I went straight to that thing that I understood so well, which was story. And I wrote a play. It's just what came through. And that play ended up getting produced in a young storytelling festival. So very young, I also learned the responsibility of storytelling, because what you put out will come back to you. And so when you put out stories of love will come back. When you put out stories of grief will come back. And so I really began to understand the ripple effect and the inherent interconnectedness of the responsibility of what you put out into the world. I ended up going on into working as a wilderness leader, working with youth at risk, again, lots of learning about group process. And one of the greatest gifts of listening, because in those communities, when you sit around the fire, when someone opens their mouth, everyone stops and they listen. And it's an extraordinary thing to get to experience. I ended up taking my love of the environment and social justice and ecological justice and worked for Al Gore, and I produced his Green Channel at the time when we were still trying to understand how to communicate about climate change. And that's when I really understood how good intentions and well-meaning people can actually be very dangerous if they don't understand the power of story and the power of language. And that's when I also took me years to understand that we've actually done something inherently against the natural laws of the world. When in that movement, we cast change as the bad guy. Change, the most natural thing on this planet, all of a sudden became the thing that evoked more fear than anything else in that narrative. And I began to see that, again, the responsibility is far more complex than I'd realized about how we use language and how we use words. I went on to understand that there's a lot of change that can happen in the room, that there's this magical thing that we'll get to talk about, and how do we work with that, and how can we alchemize it, and how can we really harness the potency of that. And that led me to designing campaigns or documentary films, and also eventually led me to like my own heart's true calling, which was working through story and ceremony. And worked and have created large scale events from 13 to 200 people working with a story ceremony and bringing ritual through story. So that's a little intro in terms of what my perspective comes from and what informs it. And along the way, I've had the great fortune of studying under some extraordinary teachers, all of which I will mention as their inspiration rolls through me. Okay, so let's call in some of the most ancient wisdom in the world. You know, I get a little self-conscious because some of you guys who have been here a bunch get to hear the same beginning every time. But it's so good. So the Hawaiians believe, you know, that the words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. So if you ever have a chance to watch the hula and see this culture, which has not lost relationship to their indigenous practices of working with sound as an embodied prayer. Please, if you want to go get chills, if you want to see it in action, it is still alive and in practice by the Hawaiians right now. And as a storyteller, might we always remember that we can slow time. Einstein's theory of relativity. We have the capacity to slow time with how we use the words. Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe, that they can change the reality. And always something to consider when we're in an argument. I always think of the Sicilians, passionate people. They really might understand what it is to say something that you can't take back. Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to our present so the future can exist. This is such a thing that I've been really listening deeply to, especially in our times when we're wanting to make so much change. How do we make sure that we don't forget our past? How do we make our past part of the story so that we can really always learn from our mistakes, learn from what's being asked to change, and not forget that? All the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I just love that. I'm going to read it again because I just love it so much. That all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. Not written, but chanted into existence. So again, when we start thinking about this world that we most want to live in, or when we consider how do we want to meet COVID times, or when we consider what is the world we most want to live in, how aware are you of how powerful your language is and how you're bringing it forth every single day? So abracadabra, one of the most ancient words on our planet. I love that there's even disagreement about where it originated from, but today I'm just going to tell you that it's from the ancient Aramaic mysticism, and it means I create as I speak. So as we begin to are winding our way into this greater conversation, and we really, our foundation is, okay, words matter. Now, as we begin to approach the realm of story, let us see if we can find some agreements and what is a story? What is a story? And Gigi, I'm sorry, how do you find what? I'm not quite sure what you're looking We want to take a gander. Oh, hula. You can Google hula on YouTube. You will find it. Yeah. And maybe Viana, who is living on the Big Island, might have some specific suggestions for places to go. Okay, so our first inquiry on the table is, what is a story? What do we know about it? Quiet group. You're very thoughtful. So yes, there's another way. Yeah. Yes, Viana.
Leah, you asked for us to insert when moved, kind of an essential eloquence that was coming through. And what came to me when you spoke abracadabra was a 5-pointed star, each of the sounds being one point of the star. And I had never thought of words and stories creating sacred geometry before this moment.
Oh, I love that. That gives me chills. Neither have I. Here, I want to show you guys the ancient spelling of it so that you can have it.
And then something like that might be called a spell. And I never considered the word spell with spelling before.
Right, right. One of the things I love is the etymology of language. It's like our words hold the codes to understanding our world. Look, word, world. That one took me years to see the combination of letters in there. So it's, and a lot of times the words that we use, a lot of them have been hijacked to mean things other than what their original intention is. And so it's really worthy, especially when there's a word that you see a lot, to start going and being an investigator and searching for the original understanding of the word. And then you're going to start to see what we're really saying. You know, so I started really thinking about all the fire that was happening in California, and that especially the areas that I've been living in, they're obsessed with transformation, completely obsessed. Everywhere you look, transformation, at least where I look. So it's you know, I'm in my little lane over here. But I was like, oh, well, that's kind of, I mean, and I want to be careful when I say these things, because I am playing through the lens of a storyteller, looking at the greater mythos, right? So I'm looking at the shape of things. And I'm like, well, there's a hilarity in that in terms of, we've been praying for the change of form. Literally, that's what transformation is. It's the change of form. So no surprise, you know, if we pretend playing this greater game that we're all connected and that we're speaking our reality in, and that this place that's so particularly obsessed with this avenue of transformation starts to burn, you know, and change form. So again, I say all this stuff because in the way of, it's a little bit dangerous. I don't want to take away from the very real also environmental hazards that are happening in our time. But as a storyteller, it's nice to get many different windows to look at what's happening. So Mara's saying stories, okay, right, we've got bigger conversation about this. Oh my gosh, this is beautiful, thank you. I'm gonna let all of you guys read what Mara's saying about abracadabra. And Wendy's saying a story is a way to share our experiences, what we have learned and what we yearn for. What we learn and what we yearn for. And so she's saying that there's a lot, and what I'm appreciating what you're saying is when is it's a very large container that lives in a story. It's both our wisdom, but that it's not just our teachings, right? You're saying that actually stories can also hold our longings. And so one of the things that I'll share is that, you know, stories can be a gift, right? We give our wisdom, we give our teaching, and we cultivate that out of our stories. But also there can be there's a resonance that comes through our stories. You know, one of the things that I've come to is that we don't speak to those who don't, we don't speak to those that don't want to hear us. We aren't speaking for them. We're speaking for those who must hear us. And there's this resonance that comes alive. So if there's a longing in you, then maybe that longing is also in others. I always think about that. I think of Martin Luther King Jr. what would have happened if he didn't speak because of all the people that didn't want to hear what he had to say? What world would we be in? You know, so think of that. Okay, so story is a lineage of personal and collective creations. Right, so you're coming off of also that Australian piece, Phoebe, of that there's lineage in our stories. We're carrying the past with us, you know, in ways that we can't even fully understand as we carry these stories. We're giving them away in a place to live in our world, and stories will change. This is a really beautiful thing about stories. I think of them like trees. You know, we don't expect a tree to stay the same its whole life. We actually want it to grow and grow and grow into fruit and to start giving us some gifts and to provide us some shade and a place to rest. And I think of stories in that exact same way, that they, you know, that there's a time when we work on our stories and there's an evolutionary process in working with stories as a transformational tool. And so you might begin with a moment, you know, where there's a lot of trauma or there's pain or there's confusion, and you're trying to make your way through it in your chosen story as your tools and mechanism to make sense. And so that process is a reflective process. And there's also a process of being witnessed. So we really see that it's one way that we can look at it is through the Me Too movement. There was this great moment where he said, my story must be heard, right? What I would say is that in a lot of places that movement stopped short though, because we didn't get necessarily as a collective the healing from that experience because we stopped with the witnessing. My story must be heard, must be seen, must be believed, okay? And this can happen through so many different experiences. But then if we want to take it into an evolutionary process and we'll say, okay, our stories are going to grow. We don't have to stay in that one position, that one role where the story was born from, right? It's like we can evolve with our stories. We can change roles, or we can change perspectives. We will be changed by horrible experiences. You know, we won't be changed by them. And stories help us alchemize the medicine and help us come through to the other side and walk across the bridge. So when we come to the arc of it, we can say, okay, now there comes a moment when at first when my story just needs to be witnessed, I'll call in people. I'm like, I need you to hear my story. I just need you to listen. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about working with what I call co-creators. You know, other people call them audience. I'll talk a little bit more about why your audience is such an important role in the co-creation process of a story. But you give them a task, you give them a role to do. And you tell them at first, and the first role is to listen. Then you're going to come up and say, you know what, I'm going to give you a gift. You know, what would it be if you were to take the story and alchemize the medicine of it, to have perspective, to see the story in the process of your soul, like of the journey of a soul. Understand what gifts in you it called out. Understand what parts of you had to go, had to die, had to be put down for some other part of you to emerge, having had this experience. What got you through? You know, so all of these things, now you're on the other side of a story and you have this gift to give. And you're like, hey, I made it through the minefield and I learned a couple of things, and don't get stuck in that sand trap, right? This is what our stories can offer when we walk through the other side. And then they can be given as a gift. And now we're in another kind of relationship, and we, in the form of the stories, are giving fruit, are providing shade, are giving people a place to rest. More and more, I think of stories as temples. You know, they're a place where people can come and commune with the deepest part of themselves without having to be seen or witnessed. And I can tell you guys a story, and you're all going to see different parts of yourself in it. And no one else has to see that but you. The good, the bad, the shadow, all of it. And it can be, the story itself can also be a place to commune with that divine creative life force. Okay. Well, that one took me on a nice little wander. See, all you have to do is say one thing, and next thing we know. And then Mari's saying, a story for me is a living river, a force that connects people throughout time immemorial. Beautiful. And so there's so many different ways to look at story, and to put us all into one lane of looking at it is, let's say that since we use the latest technology as the way to define our bodies, you know, we used to say humans were machines, now we're talking more and more in the language of computers. I'm going to say, in a very unglorified, unpoetic expression, that a story is an operating system. And in that operating system, you learn your beliefs, values, and what you believe is possible. And then a lot of things happen in that journey, in that operating system. I love it. I just heard it after so many years, that television, you know, some of the very first stories that we get in, it's called programming. It's literally, it's all in our language. You know, what roles do we think, you know, what roles did I particularly learn that I was supposed to live out in this world? What did I expect from a relationship, from love, from job, from all, you know, what did I expect from the world based on what I was being seen or being shown? Okay, so what's a sacred story? If we kind of understand this unpoetic version of what a story is, what's a sacred story? What distinguishes it? Mara is saying oh wait, I'm sorry, that was, I got excited by the chat room. You're a thoughtful group. Well, here's what I'm going to go ahead and just play with. In a sacred story, it's a setup. The second I say that word, because the second I'm calling one thing sacred, by its pure use of definition, I'm saying that something else isn't sacred. Ah, such a bummer. But I have to, I'm choosing, I don't have to, but I'm choosing to call on that word because it speaks to something that is missing in many parts of the world that many of us live in, which is a daily expression and relationship to the other world, the unseen world, that thing that we might call the divine. It's a way and practice of seeing the life force and respecting and honoring a life in all things. So that's kind of a funny thing. We call one mountain a sacred mountain, you know, because it's been honored, you know, through tradition. But why is that mountain on the other side not a sacred mountain? You know, it might not hold the same energy, but still, how do we see the divine, the life in all things? So when we look at story, I'm saying, okay, so if it's a sacred story, now we're saying, oh, well, this is a story that has the divine, that has that creative life force living inside of it, as part of it. So now I might meet the story in a very different way. One, and the other thing I'll define a sacred story is that it's a story that's here, not just any life, okay? It's a story that's here to serve life. So when you hear a sacred story, I'll just talk about me. I feel great. I feel nurtured. I feel like I just received some medicine. Oh my gosh, for those of you who were in that love medicine class, wow. I mean, it was so rich coming out of all of those stories with love medicine. I got this whole transmission and transfusion and got to see different parts of love that I've never known or experienced myself before, but I was receiving the wisdom from all these different stories, the gifts of all of them. So, you know, that creative life force, some people call it the muse, some people call it the ancestors, some people call it God, some people call it guides, some people call it the earth speaking out loud. You know, I don't think that we have to all use the same language. It's what it resonates with you and who you are and what your background is with that unseen life force. But what I do understand about it is that it's a humble process. It's not me going out to make a documentary film because I want you to become a vegetarian. And so now I'm going to show you all the horrors and all the bad things so that I scare you into becoming a vegetarian. I'm all for vegetarians. I'm not bashing that, but I'm saying that's a very different kind of story than, I would almost say, that hilarious scene out of The Simpsons where Lucy says, she starts having these dreams and these little lambs start coming to her and they go, Lucy, don't eat me. You know, that one scene has stayed with me and made me reconsider my relationship to meat more times than any scary documentary. And so I'd say there's a touch of beauty and entertainment and joy and something that was also so horrific, you know. So how do we tell stories? How do we tell hard stories? How do we help people look at really hard things? By giving them soul food, which is beauty. So beauty feeds the soul. So how do we tell our stories? How do we work as guides How do we bring people into the hardest parts to see the most grotesque parts of life so that perhaps it can be transmuted or composted or transformed? And as storytellers, we're those bold guides. People are not going to follow you into the wilderness of that which they most fear and that of which they're most ashamed of, unless they can trust you, unless they know that you are going to bring them out. So this is, again, is a distinction of what makes a sacred story. You're not going to leave them in the horrors of suicide or of loss or grief. You're going to bring them in close. You're going to let them touch something that perhaps they haven't been able to touch themselves before, because you're so bold in your expression of it. There's a humbleness that comes through these stories because you're being guided as much as you're guiding. If I know anything about sacred storytelling, it's so easy. The ease is actually what I think creates any stumble for people, because the story, once you get into that space of listening, will guide you all the way through, and all you have to do is follow it. You have some skill and craft and technique, but aside from that, the sacred story will often guide you. So I don't know why I'm talking about vegetarianism today. I don't know who of you has called out that theme. I've never talked about it before in the realm of sacred storytelling, but it was a prime example of the distinction. And so an example of, if you're like saying, okay, well, that's kind of fine. I think I have a little bit of a handle on what a sacred story is. What's not a sacred story? And I would say, I really want to invite you to put on your super duper zombie spotting goggles and start spotting the zombie stories among us. And a zombie story is a story that is not here to serve life. It's doing something else. It's like sucking the energy out of the room. And so a zombie story, it's like, for me, I usually don't feel that good afterwards. I feel a little depressed and down. I often think that humans should get off the planet. Actually, I never have that thought. Can I just say that? I actually never have that thought. But I've seen a lot of stories that kind of make you, they're trying to gear you towards like hating humans. And I'm like, that's just not a sacred story. That's a zombie story I never saw one. But they show you the most grotesque parts of humans without showing the beauty, without telling the whole story. They leave you living in fear or in some kind of pain body. They don't carry you out to the other side. So think about that as you start, considering what movies are you watching. I'm not saying don't go to hard to watch documentaries. You need those. Those are courageous mirrors that are there. Those are our mirror makers. But I am saying it's like, be really aware of your choice and your decision making about what stories, and you can become the superpower of being able to have that guardian where I can see any story, but I don't have to agree to carry it. And I feel like that's when, it's like I've seen some people say, oh, I'm not going to be around anyone that's not positive. And I'm like, what world are you living in? It's like you don't have to take on their story. And that's one of the strengths of becoming strong in our times, is being able to really listen and receive all the stories, no matter what form or what shape or what stage they're in, because we're all in very different stages with our stories. And so as an advanced practitioner of storytelling, you can start looking at stories now and at the people who are carrying them, and start having a greater, wider sense of compassion and consideration, and really seeing people, oh, you're in this stage of telling the story, okay. And receive them in that stage. Oh, this is a story that could become a sacred story, but one step, or this is a total zombie story, and watch that one fly on by. Thank you very much for pointing it out to me, So you become super spidey eyes with that. Okay, so as we enter into this, it's one of the things I just want to speak about is working with your co-creators, and then I'm going to give you a story recipe. If you have any questions, then by all means, I'll pop in. So one of the greatest illusions in the realm of storytelling that I know of is that it's all about the storyteller. The storyteller has all the power. It's an amazing illusion. I like to think of storytelling like gardening. So as a storyteller, you've got the power in the sense that you've got the seed, right? You have the seed of intention, You know, who are you as a storyteller? What are you in service to? What are you giving with your story? Okay, these are all of the distinctions of what makes a sacred storyteller. I would say there's sacred storytellers who are here in service to give a gift, and then there are vampire storytellers who are sucking all the energy out of the room. You know, they're very alluring, and you just can't stop looking at them. But when you leave, you don't feel that great, and you might feel really exhausted and tired. I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm just saying it's a different way of working with the energy and your voice and your how powerful you are in that expression. And so when we come into the realm of that sacred storyteller, we understand that you're actually could also be called a sacred gardener, and that you are planting seeds. You're planting values, belief systems, of ways of beings, of visions of the future. You're planting the gems of wisdom. Everyone knows that it's the story of the giver and the receiver. Who holds the power in that connection? It's a weird word, power, but I'm just going to use it because we understand it. You can give something, but there's no fun to have something to give if no one's going to receive it. Same thing. If your garden isn't very well tilled and well composted and well tended, your seeds aren't going to grow. They're not going to take root. And I think that this is something very worth taking into consideration, because you know there's a law on our planet called entropy that all things participate in, except stories. It kind of blows my mind. Everything falls apart, everything, but the stories don't. You know, they will keep on living through us if they're strong enough and there's enough life force for them to continue to be carried. So what would it be to have a story that has so much in it that it keeps getting carried and carried and carried far past your lifetime? What could you be giving to some other future time by crafting one of the most beautiful, playful, delightful teaching stories that just kind of spreads because people can't help but repeat it? So when approaching this idea of, if you're the gardener and you want to make sure that you have a great big rich garden that your stories land in, now you start understanding that really the person or the people in the room that perhaps hold extraordinary amount of, we're going to use that word power again, influence, consideration, are your co-creators, your listeners. And so how do you prepare them to catch what you have to give? And how not just catch it, but truly receive it, allow it to come into them. So I'll tell you briefly a couple of ideas. And what these are designed to spark your imagination. If there's anything that I know about stories, is that if you come to them humbly and ask them, what do you need? They're going to tell you how to prepare your co-creators for them. They just can't help it, right? They're chatting their nature. So my first quick, easy thing that I like to do is create a Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore moment. So when I do story ceremonies, it often starts the moment people walk in the door. They're not talking, they're not jibber-jabbering. They've created a space that holds the divine in it. There's a beautiful altar with flowers. They're greeted at the door. We look at them. We say that they're seen, right? We give them a place, we bring them to the place where they're seated. We serve them tea. You know, they say no ceremony is complete without plants, or plant allies. So again, they don't go serve themselves. We're helping them come into that position of receiving. We serve them, and all of a sudden they feel honored, and they feel seen. You know, and you know, how do you get someone to hear you? You listen to them. It's like, you know, communication 101. The same thing with your storytelling. How do you create places for your I'm just going to say audience to be seen and heard and feel that they're being met in that way? So if you go to a big, huge concert, you know, you'll hear them get the audience roaring at the beginning, right? They'll say like, can we hear you now? And blah, blah, blah. And like people start roaring, and it's like, that's actually presencing them fully into the room. You know, when I was at Google and I gave talks to them, I gave each person that walked in a rose. You know, it's just that Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. And that kind of shocked them into like, wait, what's happening here? And I invited them to smell it before they spoke, and giving them an opportunity to come into relationship with their senses. Okay, so those are a couple of examples. just what for those of you who caught the very beginning, what did we do? But as storytellers, we closed our eyes. We looked inward first. I asked you what you wanted from today. I gave you a job. I gave you a task. You know, a lot of times when talking story, I'll ask people very specifically, please listen for what is so alive in you and needs tending. That thing that won't leave you alone. And now listen as if this story has something specific to give to that, to speak to that part of you that most needs to be heard right now. So again, it's not like they're actively trying to find the thing that's going to talk about their grandmother, you know, but they're listening for that deeper magic that can come through the story. Other ways to prepare your storyteller, your listeners. I think that's it. You know, give them a Toto moment, give them a task, a job, and give them an opportunity to really hear them and listen. All right, I am going to give you a story recipe, and then I'm going to give you a story, and then that is going to complete our day. In terms of, for those of you who came for the class, that will be it. For those of you who want to continue to learn about storytelling and sacred storytelling and how to work with me specifically, I'll then continue on and talk about this amazing new class that's about to happen called Sanctuary. And here we go. So here's a story recipe for you. This is such a great recipe for our times. How do you get through hard times? What is the wisdom that you hold within you? And so some people get really, I feel this kind of fear when I start using the word wisdom. And it's like, you know, knowledge is earned, but wisdom, knowledge is learned, but wisdom is earned. It's like your wisdom emerges once you harvest it and cultivate it. Right? That's why I love storytelling, is it gives us that way to metabolize, alchemize, and brush off and shine up those gems of our lives. So go begin with a time in your life that really sucked. Like the worse, the better. The more obnoxious the situation, the harder, the more unresolved, you know, just go for it. Find that time. If it's a wisdom story, you're on the other side of it. So you're not right. Okay, so if you're still absolutely right and everyone else was absolutely wrong, you might not be ready to make this into a wisdom story yet. But or maybe you just want to go in with the intention to find wisdom in the story. So you begin with that, you know what the situation is. Now, I want to invite you to find when the story really begins. So this is what defines you as a sacred storyteller versus a fact and information giver, right? So if I was to tell you about my experience of going and my experience with thyroid cancer, I might tell you that, you know, it began on the day that I met the doctor who diagnosed me. But I am a sacred storyteller, and every story has a story of somehow of my soul in the greater perspective. And also because the archetype of the storyteller is the weaver, right? Is the spider, and the weaving through time and space, connecting all the dots. My story really begins when I was 4 years old. When I was looking up on this wall, and there was this beautiful tapestry, and it said, "Give what you have, Lena. To someone else, it may mean more than you dare to think." And I was 4 years old, and I was learning to read, and I couldn't make sense of it. I really didn't understand it. And I remember reading that line over and over and over again. Give what you have. And all of a sudden, 29 years later, it came back to me when that doctor sitting across from me at the desk told me I had thyroid cancer, told me I had a very extreme case, and that they'd be cutting across my larynx. There's a very good chance that I might lose my voice. And now I know what I have. So again, that's an example of, you know, it's not just about that one moment. It's about who we are and what's made us and what's brought us to that moment. And what we're also looking for are these universal themes. So John Steinbeck says, if your story is not about the listener, it will not continue. Okay, they won't carry it. I just completely killed this quote. Please forgive me. It's a beautiful quote, but I'm not grasping the moment. But the story must be about the listener, or they will not carry it. So there's a universality of your story. And so if I'm at the beginning of the trauma of my experience with that particular one, I might just have some people be like, I just need you to know what's happening. I need you to listen, you know. But in this case, I'm like, what's the universal expression? What was the initiation? Here's a great question. What initiation was I offered through this experience? This is a tricky thing. We don't live in a time that really, that uses initiation, engages initiation in our culture. We have very, very, very few accesses to initiations. Doesn't mean that we're not being initiated all the way through our lives, though. Storytelling gives us that opportunity to see these experiences as initiations and claim the medicine of them. So what is your initiation, and what is your, you know, what is that unique thing that what is your non-unique thing that is part of the universal experience of growing up as a human? Growing up, meaning from the birth to the death expression, right? So, you know, in this case, you know, I had this moment where I had played a certain role in my life for a very, very long time. And I'm just going to call that role, I'm going to give it a title, and it was called the victim. And I, you know, earned that role. I've been through a lot of situations where, you know, it's like I learned the lines, I had the outfits, like I really understood how to play it. And here I was in this moment of my life when this doctor was like, it's like he had the purple velvet pillow and the crown, the queen of victimhood was right on it. And he was there and he was like handing it to me. And I had this moment, I had this opportunity where I could receive that crown. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, hell no. I do not want to play that role ever again, anymore in my lifetime. And that was that moment when all of a sudden it was like this escape hatch, like opened in the room. And I jumped through and I had no idea where I was going or what the lines were or what I was going to be. I just knew in this moment, in this initiation, I was never going to play that role ever again because I was at a choice point. So that's an example of, you know, I didn't know that at the moment. I didn't have a clue. All I knew is I just honestly started laughing at everything. It was just my way out. I was like, I'm not going to cry. I'm going to find a way to laugh. And through doing that, through changing my expression, I found a new role. Through looking back, I can now see what my soul was doing. And I can look back and tell the story. Okay? Because when we come to those choice points in life, don't we have as much guidance? Don't we want as much guidance in the coffers to inspire us and inform us in those moments when we have those snap moment decisions? The other thing that you want to look at is, who are your guides? You know, who are the beings? Who is your Yoda? Every story's got a Yoda or a fairy godmother. Someone outside of your family system that assists you on your journey is a very important being that's outside your family system. Show you what you're really made of. And as you ask these questions, what's my universal theme? Who is my Yoda? You know, it's not, again, it's a sacred story. All you have to do is sit back and watch the show. It's like, it's a very humble process of taking all of your deep thinking, getting it out of your scrunched eyebrows, getting it out of your head, and kind of listening outside of yourself. So as you consider your story, I really invite you, go for a walk, go for a bath, sweep the floor, you know, chop water, chop wood, carry water, and the listening, the story will inform you. And so for me, it was a garden. And that garden taught me everything. And I ended up making this big spiral 70-foot garden because it gave me all the wrong drugs when I came out of the hospital. And I was on speed and I had all this energy, and I invited my friends over and I was like, let's build a garden. They thought I was crazy. And I was like, I don't know, I've got all this energy. Let's use it for the right reason. And so we did it. And then 2 weeks later, I became incredibly, incredibly, incredibly depressed. And that garden taught me about gratitude, something I knew nothing about. I can't tell you how or why or when it happened, but I do know that I ended up creating this daily practice of every morning I would walk the circles of that spiral and I would say what I was grateful for. The garden taught me how to do that. And on the way out, I would pray, and I prayed for my life. And so again, that's an example of, you might not have known exactly how it worked at that moment, but looking back, you can hear things and see things that you might not have been able to see in the moment. And then an ending. An ending is a very, is a thing that we could do an entire class on, how to write a great ending. I'm already over, I'm so sorry. but here's how so much was inspired in your presence today. And what I'll say is, as a great ending, I learned from Carolyn Casey introduced this to me, and she learned it from John O'Donohue, who I highly recommend going and reading anything that he's offered. Listening to his voice is even better. He's an Irish mystic, and he talks about the story blessing, which he actually, I believe, learned from the Kabbalah tradition. And this, it's where you take sort of like a metaphor from your story and you encapsulate it into a blessing that you can give your listeners. And so it might sound like, so if you ever find yourself out in the deep, deep, deep ocean in the middle of the night and your ship has sunk, and you can hear and feel the vibration of the sea monsters, the scariest kind, awoken from your presence out of the depths, coming up and beginning to circle around you. Then, may the moon cast a light so bright that you can see all that is beneath and all that is beside and all the beings who are also there, here to help you, as she shows you the path to safety and to land. So you end with that kind of blessing, and no one even noticed that you didn't finish your story. It's great. So there you go. So that is one way to create a threshold wisdom story. And so for those of you, who is the Irishman's name, Pearl asks, and that is John O'Donohue. John O'Donohue. So that is our class for today. And for those of you who are interested to hear about, if there are any questions, is there anything lingering before I change channels and talk a little bit about this next class? Final thoughts. I always like, if you have to go and feel called, I always invite people to anchor in what they're taking with them, because it usually inspires other people and reminds other people of what was found. And so if you feel called to do that, you can put that in the chat box. And then what I'm going to do now is talk to you about a class that's coming up. And this class is called Sanctuary. And I should pull up it would be generous of me to give you the link. And so I will do that. Oh, I thought I was going to do that. I'll give it to you in a moment. So this class is called Sanctuary, and this is a course that is completely born out of our times. And I have been teaching storytelling as a sacred art form for the last 3 years online, and holding and hosting story ceremonies. And one of the things that I was seeing, from the students that I was working with, is that oftentimes we didn't get to go deep enough. And also we didn't get to kind of start at ground zero to really understand the full capacity of who we each are as creators. And as I was finishing this last round of class, I asked a couple people if they wanted my guidebook to psychic silence. And what I understand as psychic silence is it's something that I learned about over years, because I've been writing this really long book, and every time I went to go write it, who I am as a creator, I needed everything to be super quiet. I needed to get away from all things that were related to matter. And so over time, I realized that I'd actually created a very systematic approach to creating what I call psychic silence. And once I discovered that, I was like, oh, I'd love to share that. And I asked if anyone else was interested, and sure enough, there's some people that were interested. And so then COVID happened. And my normal approach of getting to go away to create actually, you know what happened in COVID. There was no going away. And so all of a sudden I had to figure out how do I create that psychic silence at home. And so I went in for this kind of deep listening. And the first exercise that I did, and I just give this exercise to you as a gift, just as an incredible thing to do at the time. Hold on, I'm gonna help whoever that is come on to mute. Is a great exercise to do as you start each day, if you want to play with, what really wants to come through you, especially in these times, is asking yourself every morning, where does my creative life force want to go today? Such a simple question. where does my creative life force want to go today? And it's going to speak to where is that life? Where is the life that flows through you, and how does it most want to be expressed? And then if you want to really play at the game, you can create 2 columns on a piece of paper. And on the next column, you can write at the end of the day, what did I actually do? You know, when I started this, I was like, oh, I want to read more books. I want to garden. I want to actually redesign my room. And then I would go spend 5 hours on a computer or answering emails. It was great when I got to see the real distinction between what was actually calling to be moved through me, and then what habits was I stuck in that I was constantly doing that was actually in the way of the truest expression of, you know, let's call it the genius, what Michael Meade calls that genius that lives in all of us, that really holds the special keys and the gifts to what we have to offer this time. And I think more often than ever, because we have such limited roles that are valued in our, you know, so I'm talking in the United States, I know we have a lot of people from around the world here, but, you know, it's like, unless you found a way to succeed or thrive in certain roles, your truest gift might not be able to be seen or recognized. So this is one of those ways to be able to see that and claim that and recognize that. And that's one of the things that we're going to be doing in this class. So anyway, so I went in for a big, deep journey. And one of the things that kept coming alive in me this time was really creating that sacred space that I could create in. And initially it wanted to happen in my bedroom. And I had all kinds of fun, exciting thoughts about why I was making sacred space in my bedroom. But what it really turned out to be was that as I started to listen, was that that's a space where we're dreaming. It's our dreaming space. And so if that place isn't clear, if we don't have psychic silence and as a clear space in our bedroom, then how aware are we of how we're being affected by the outside world, by our collective conscious? When there's so much going on in that world, we really want to be able to be very attuned to being able to hear the distinction between someone else's fear, someone else's of facts, and our innermost, deepest, most knowing. What is our inner compass telling us? And also our access to that kind of the wisdom, the knowing that comes through that creative life force. So the class, what we do is we make a sanctuary, and we go forth as a group, and we transform one of the rooms in our house. And there's this 80-page guidebook called The Conscious Creator's Guide to Psychic Silence, using ritual, prayer, and ceremony to activate your creator matrix. I know I've won the title for most complex title of all time. And what that's designed to do is really give you an opportunity to experience yourself in a fully embodied expression of who you are as a creator. And so what that means is that you get to see all of your strengths, all of your challenges. So some of you might be brilliant creators. You've got no problem going in and starting a project. It's so easy for you, you know, but you might be very challenged by finishing. Okay, so this is going to start to show you what your creator matrix is. A lot of the creator matrix literally came through a dream. I started getting so inspired as I started to create this program that it was getting informed by my dreams. And a lot of people said, don't use the word matrix. Everyone's just going to think of Keanu Reeves. And I was like, yeah, it's true, but like, why not just trust the language that comes through the dreams? And that when we look at the etymology of matrix, it speaks to the form and function. It shows us what is our form and function. What are we made of? What is our unique operating system? And what do we need to absolutely thrive? So you'll also get to understand, you know, the principles of as above, so below, as within, so without. And you're going to get to see all the different things that are living in your psychic space, all the different roles that you consciously play or unconsciously play, you know, all the different scripts that you tell yourself knowingly or unknowingly. You're going to have this opportunity to catch them through the use of this guidebook. And then we actually get to alchemize and compost and harvest and work with them through story, through ritual, through ceremony, and through our storytelling time in class as we come back as a group. So you get to work with a small group of people that you will get to really call on and will hold you through the times in between class. We meet for 6 weeks in class. And then this other group, they're like your super conspirators. They're those people that you get to grow with, who witness your personal transformation, who you can also say, hey, I'm totally stuck, or hold you accountable. and who also, what I love about these groups is I think I want to call them like the greatness groups, because basically you're all there to call out each other's greatness and to see the greatness in each other and to really help that emerge in the time that we're working together. You know, I think one of the things that I understand about this time in particular and the gift that COVID has given me is that you really get to be discerning about how you use your time or how I use my time. And I've realized that these groups give us an extraordinary moment to choose what we belong to. And one of the things that I see this group as being really powerful about belonging to is also carrying forward some of the old wisdom teachers. So one of the things that this class has is I kind of went overboard with my guest teachers because, again, I love teaching the classes that I most want to take. And as I started really committing myself to this idea of as within, so without, and the deep metaphor of what it is to be a storyteller, and that story is a temple, and what is it to become a temple keeper, and really understanding that we all agree, you know, it can be such a transformational experience to go through this and go this as a group. I also wanted to be able to have those linear teachings that help our non-linear expression and experience as we go through it. So the teachers that are coming through are phenomenal. We have Brooke Eagle Medicine, who is one of the first women who brought indigenous practices from her traditions to the Western world. And she's going to be one of our very first teachers on July, I think somewhere around July 3rd, I believe, who's going to teach us about ritual and ceremony. And it was really important for me to have someone who's been a part of a lineage that's still connected to that indigenous knowledge that gives us these teachings. And it felt really important for me to honor that specific lineage because, every ritual and ceremony belongs to all of us, she would say. And to also honor the people that have been carrying it through the times that tried to squash it. It was very, very meaningful. So I wanted to give an opportunity to carry that wisdom forward and give it an expression to as many people as possible. There will also be Elaine Kalila and Dowdy, and she is has her own program called Priestess Presence, and she's going to be bringing us through a class about what is it to create a temple, like a sacred space that created, and she's an extraordinary teacher. She's one of my teachers. I just adore her. Sort of saying, will this recording be available to watch afterwards? Yes. Yes, you're going to get an email with it, and it's going to come back around. And thank you. So there's Elaine, and then we have Kristen, who's going to come, and she's going to teach us about creating a sacred symbol. So, a lot of times I work with story as a doorway threshold to collaborating with divine. Kristen works with drawing. And so you're going to get to have an experience of making a sacred symbol that is uniquely yours and will get to be part of your altar that you're creating. Then we also are going to be working with Diana Dubrow, who is an elder keeper and actually has worked with Heather, and they've done amazing things together. And she's holding some really ancient wisdom on anointing and the practice of working with sacred oils. Her oils are, she's sourced some extraordinary oils and developed extraordinary relationship with creating them. And then what is it to become someone that anoints yourself and anoints others? And that, again, it's like this process of what is it to really gain experience in holding sacred space as you prepare yourself to become a storyteller and treating it as a sacred art form. Then we have, I love that, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Vika B. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I love how it all winds together. And then we have Alika Atai, and he's from the island of Maui, and he has been a fierce warrior of protecting indigenous ways of gardening and farming on that land, and he's been very engaged with the GMO movement. And I know you're now thinking, why on earth do we have a Hawaiian farmer coming into a storytelling class? But if there's anything that I understand about this work, we're planting seeds. And so to understand the practical practice of what it is, to understand the indigenous ways of being in relationship with the land and how to prepare yourself as a seed planter. It's like, as within, so without. It really does apply. And he's also, we will actually, in our rituals and what we'll be doing, we literally will be planting seeds. And so it seemed to be an extraordinary alignment to bring him to us. So that is Sanctuary, in the most nonlinear expression I could possibly imagine telling it to you. It is really designed to support who you are as a creator. And so even if storytelling isn't your thing, this initiation class for a year-long program is really designed to stand on its own and to speak for anyone who really wants to know who I am as a creator. Even if you build buildings or, design bridges or, make community or, are committed to social change. Who are you as a creator? Who are you as a conscious creator in our times? And then the next class that feeds into is Mythos. And that's our first class that we go into as a group and to then begin to cultivate and harvest what we learned about ourselves and that experience, who we are as creators, as we then go on to make and tell our individual creation myth. And then that 4-week class has more story coaching, and we only work on one class during that entire time. Will you also be facilitating during Sanctuary? Yes. So thank you, Kim, for asking that. So the way that works is that we meet for 6 weeks in a row, once a week on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and from 10 to 12. And I facilitate all those classes, and you'll never, ever hear me talk this much in a row ever again in any of those classes. Then the guest teachers come on usually Fridays or Saturdays for an extra class. And so those are considered bonus classes. If you can't come live, you can always watch the recording. Coming live is the most fun, just because it is. It's just more fun. And these are all designed to be live and interactive. If you register today, here we go. I always forget to tell these details. But if you feel called and you're like, yes, I want to get in there and I want to join, I offer a couple different things. So I'll just talk the details of how it all works now. When you register for Sanctuary, the class is $350. And if you decide to choose to bring on Mythos as well, Mythos on its own is $197. I think you get a $50 discount when you register for both of them at the same time. And then for people who register today, to enthuse you and prepare you for our time together, I add something else that's rather special, which is my entire library of over 30 hours of guest master teachers who have been teaching over the last 3 years in my school for sacred storytelling. So those teachers include Carolyn Casey and Michael Mead and Charles Eisenstein, and it's something that usually it's valued $200, and I'm offering it as a gift for anyone who feels called and ready and wants to start absorbing a little early. And then please confirm if Tuesdays from 10 to 12. Yes, Kim, it is on Tuesdays from 10 to 12 Pacific Standard Time, as that is when we'll be meeting. Okay, that was so much information. I should give you the link. Obviously, an email is going to come through in just a little bit, and you will get a recording of this, and as well as everything else as a link to everything. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stay on. And then I do work one-on-one with people, so if you're feeling the call to really work with your class, with your stories, but that group thing isn't quite your thing, that's also another possibility. Will the classes be recorded? Absolutely. And there are some times when people come and they actually can't come. Like I've had, some people who live, I do it at 10 a.m. now so that more and more people from Europe can participate, because that was always a challenge. And so, but if you can't come, not everyone is like Jacqueline, who is in Australia and comes at 3:30 in the morning. I don't know how she does that. It starts, I believe we're going to start on the 30th. I might have to delay it 1 week. Heather, I'm going to talk to you about that. But it's going to be starting in the very, very soon. Yay, Kim, so delightful. So one of the things, I said I was going to end with a story. Why don't I give you guys a story? It's a very, 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 very short story. And I like to tell it to illustrate that you don't need a long time to tell a story. And I'm going to begin by telling you where the story comes from. Normally, I like to honor the names of the people and the place where a story comes from. And this story has a little bit of mystery in it because I actually don't know the name of the woman who gave it to me. I really tried to find it and I couldn't find her name. But I was attending a retreat at Buckhorn Springs held by Dot, this wily old woman who had this open source approach to telling, doing a women's retreat. And there was this woman there that was there doing story, and I was very narrative, and I was very early in my own understanding and getting to know this thing of story. We gathered around her, and she said something I've never forgotten. She said, I'm going to give you a story, as if it was a gift that I could carry. She went on to say, I had a grandmother who was in the Holocaust, and she was in Auschwitz. And she tells me the story of this time when she was in a cell with 6 other women. They were very, very, very hungry. They were literally starving. And she could see that something needed to change. And she wanted to do something. She wanted to do anything. And all that she had on her was the wedding ring that had been sewn into her jacket. And so she went to the guard and she offered him this ring in exchange for 6 eggs for the 6 women that were in that room. He obliged and he received her ring. But when he came back, he only had 4 eggs. It was all he could find. And she looked at those eggs, and she looked at those women, and she felt the hunger in them. And she knew that she didn't have enough. So she got a bowl. She cracked those eggs, and she separated out the yolks. And that day, she gave them something that the food couldn't. She gave them facials. And she gave them their humanity. I love that story. And it's something that I carry with me. In those moments that I pray that I will always be able to see the bigger story and the bigger offering, and understand that sometimes the hunger that really needs to be fed isn't something so temporary as the bite of food in that moment, but as a story that we can carry to hold us in those moments. So I give it to you, carry as you wish. And that is our day. That is our day. I'll end you with a quote because that's how we do things. We always end with a quote from someone else because it honors the lineage from which you come. So there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is or how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself for it to work. You have to keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. Keep the channel open. And that is by Martha Graham. All right. There we go. Thank you for your generous time today. And I went wildly over. And I'm going to take you all off mute and we can say farewell together. Except that I didn't take you off mute. There we go. Okay. No, I don't. Farewell.
Thank you once again, Leah.
Thank
Adios.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Aloha.
Blessings.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely day. Farewell. Have a good day. Take good care.
Are we going to get a replay of that? Because I have some friends that weren't on this that would probably be interested in your class. So maybe I could send it over to them or something.
Yes, there will be a replay. It's going to go out later today.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was really powerful.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Gigi, I owe you an email.
Thank you. I got a call, so I didn't want to be on screen. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Oh, good. Good. Thank you. All right. Take good care. Bye, Ray.
Bye.